might include you in the urban interest group. So this conversation today begins from a simple but perhaps still very pressing premise, which is that most of today's peace and environmental and climate challenges are happening in urban contexts. Cities and towns concentrate environmental risks, infrastructural inequality, social fractures and fragmentation. They're key to in conflicts. But they also concentrate a lot of institutions, resources, power, knowledge, and perhaps opportunities for collaboration. At the same time, what we seem to have noticed is that environmental peacebuilding has not fully acknowledged or engaged yet with urban dimension as a distinct context or set of dynamics within its field. And so in this roundtable today, we want to explore what would it mean to take the urban seriously as part of environmental peacebuilding, and how can we improve, expand both research and policy and practice in the context of the urban. I'll start with just like kind of three interlinked propositions as a bit of a framing, and then I'll introduce our panel. So I think what we could hypothesize is that the urban is not only a site of risk, but also one of peace potentials, right? And that's why it's interesting for us in the context of environmental peacebuilding to think about it. Concretely, that could mean service provisions, climate adaptation, thinking about the design of public spaces, mobility, environmental cooperation and management in cities. These are all also peace-relevant issues, right? We'll also probably talk about the fact that the urban is not only a site, but it's also a set of dynamics. And I hope that as we talk about this in the conversation, always keep in mind that the urban is not only a place, a site, but something else, politics, etc. And then lastly, because this is an interdisciplinary and both practice and research panel, I want to keep that double agenda also in mind, right? Both research as well as practice. Okay, so let's move to the practical side. We're pleased to have this roundtable be an important step in the development of the policy brief on urban climate, peace, and security that will be presented by Matti Lehtonen from UNEP, the Climate Security Mechanism at the UN. And then we'll have interventions by Laura Peters, professor at Oregon State University, Hector Morales from Adelphi, and Martha Bagwesega from the Life and Peace Institute. And all of them bring different views from different parts of the world and from different sites, academia, practice, policy to this conversation. So it is that each of the panelists will speak for around 10 minutes. Some have presentations, some have not. And then afterwards, we'll open it up for conversation with you all. But without much further ado, Matti, perhaps you can tell us a bit about the development and the origins of this briefing and where you're at right now.
Thank you very much. Yes, and delighted to be here to talk about the policy brief. And the first difficulty I have is already with my belonging, and that the title is not environmental peacebuilding right now. It says climate peace and security. And I am from the Climate Security Mechanism, which brings together different parts of the UN together. So I'm with UNEP, but I work with colleagues from peace and security side, DBPA, DPO, for those who know the alphabet soup, and as well as UNDP, together on climate peace and security, which is about, as you all know, about climate change being a risk multiplier, and how do you understand that risk multiplier in the context of existing vulnerabilities and reasons for conflict. So it's something that's maybe more around the term risk, so more about future pressures, where environmental peacebuilding is definitely relevant, and sometimes it is said that environmental peacebuilding is when you start responding, and you you see that this is a lot about responding. So you already referred to the mega trends, but from this perspective, it's, and I think Laura, hopefully you'll update us on the research, but from the business security side, there's very little on urban, although the building theory is talking a lot about bottom-up approaches, despite the fact that almost 60% of us live in cities. There is an urban agenda, and that says that yes, policies are there and the declarations are fine, but the implementation is not even. The IPCC from the climate side has quite a strong language on saying that this is definitely a risk, and it is a risk, especially in informal context. So with this in mind, we had different types of events, but centered around peer learning sessions on that were organized by the Environmental Peacebuilding Association, Adelphi and CSM, on what do we know and what do we know we don't know about urban climate security. And it was clearly established that it is a conceptual blind spot. So climate-based security talks about things like farmer-herder conflict, which is very relevant still. But if the most of humanity lives in cities, we should have something to say about the urban dimension as well. Well, we did. So while there isn't exactly a lot of examples we came across about policies driving climate-based security in cities, we did see that there are good practice, there are elements, there are examples, and that's why we are then trying to process how do we talk about those examples and how can we catalyze more of good stuff happening and maybe more systematically. So we are doing this policy brief as the climate security mechanism. That's very much intends to have the balance between risk and opportunity. So it's supposed to foster a solutions-oriented discussion. That's the whole idea of these policy briefs. And it is mostly for peace builders, and then secondly for the environmental community, and building on the experience that the urban people already share. So first of all, the question is about the risks and understanding how does climate security look like in urban settings, and we have had a consultant, Antonio Sampaio, leading on a work that has gathered that evidence and spells out those risks pathways that are often used in climate security studies. And here are the three main risk pathways. One is urban instability. This is the food riots type of thing where things related to climate change, such as food security, accumulates in cities. The second one is a one step more hard security, which is because natural resources such as water, and it can also waste it, big example, either become scarce or become so valuable that it is actually of interest of illicit livelihoods of organized crime and mafias. And the third one is linked to the whole involuntary migration and vulnerable areas where these people come to in cities. And this is a part that the policy brief kind of has covered in already based on state research. What is then much more still under processing is the really the opportunities part on what do we find, how is the urban peace building, environmental peace building, or climate peace security different? How does it look like, and how do we structure these examples that we've seen? And this concept goes a little bit beyond just saying, well, we have risk pathways, and as long as we address those risk pathways, then we have peace. It's also saying that environment can be a good platform for sustaining peace, building peace. So beyond addressing just conflict causes, and this is based on at least publications that UNEP has put out there already 15 years ago, and so not a new concept as such. And we do have, again, as I said, the UN Habitat report on these things. We do have urban experience that has also been published. Now, getting into how does it then work if we talk about solutions and opportunities. The easy part is the biophysical world, and I have there the small propeller that you can't really see. It's climate-related security risks in the middle, and what this part is talking about is the biophysical, is the hazards and the pressures, shocks that the climate enhances, and it's about water, and it's about landslides, and it's about things you all know, and things that science is very capable of quantifying, and we can easily do trend and hotspot analysis that can serve early warning systems. I have some statistics at the global level, just as an example, but I won't go into that there. Not talking about opportunities, the environment offers nature-based solutions, pollution action, climate action, that not only helps to have cleaner air and better health of ecosystems, but also protects communities. So this is all happening, and you have all kinds of toolkits. This is in the urban context. So this is not anything that needs, in our view, more attention as such. However, there's the question of, are we really directing all these efforts in the places that need it the most? And are we really using it for building? Are we getting the full potential out of this work? And this is the harder part to articulate, but we are trying to make the case that, first of all, there's just the green gentrification question, that you don't, the parts of city, and this is a NASA reference. It's a map of Cali from Colombia. On the left hand, you have just the heat island map, which shows you where the hottest parts of the city. But unless you compare it with the social strata, which is the next part, you will, for purely environmental reasons, you will put more trees where there already are more trees, and you already do have lots of green areas, spaces in the wealthier parts of town. Whereas for our questions, it would be how is it reducing inequalities through doing this work. Now, you do have tools and we're moving now to the more vulnerability side of the climate-related security risks. You do have tools. The urbanism, disaster risk reduction, peace and security, they provide all kinds of analytical and action frameworks that we can use. I won't get into the exact ones that I mentioned here, but the question this leads to is, are we then doing it in integrated ways somewhere? And before I get to the answer, I still have an updated version of what you already saw. So again, we are very capable of the early warning systems and describing what the hazards and shocks are, what the environmental pressures are. We are able to have solutions, climate action, pollution action, to improve the situation. There is also the part of climate peace and security that does look on the vulnerability side, not very much focused on cities, but that would be the risk pathways that we are mentioning in the policy brief draft, and there are ways to address all this, and you have some experience of doing urban peace building, for example, community violence reduction. But what the policy brief is trying to address is this intersection between them, is that if you do environmental work, it's a very good tool for urban peace building, and there's a demand for it. And we, with the policy brief, want to encourage having that link. Also, the environmental community, this policy brief would like to encourage better targeting of where that environmental action happens, so that it is really for sustaining peace. And now the question was, do we have examples? And the answer is we have some examples, not a lot. This is a very difficult to digest format of a table, and then I would be very happy to get back to this conversation afterwards on how do we actually present it in a way that's digestible, but there are integrated approaches that we have seen that are sometimes very bottom up, that are sometimes really like the UN example in Haiti. There was community violence reduction that used nature-based solutions, quite a top-down way of doing things. And I know my time is up, but I am coming to my last slide, which is about kind of wrapping it up, that the one key message we do have for the peace builders and even the environmental community, that cities are first responders. We don't really necessarily always recognize it, but they are very much first responders, and we as peace builders should also not ignore them and not think of them as somewhere down the line the ones who will implement something, but it is also coming from we should be more interested in how to do that in cities. There's the question of cities being more nimble on integrating the kind of categorizations and sectors that we always have everywhere in all administrations, including the UN and including why the CSM exists, to bridge between those sectors. And finally, the cities are not only nimble, but they are the hubs for innovation. So definitely there will be some thinking after the policy brief on financing pathways that you can't just pretend that you'll have grant funding as before and you get all the climate vertical funds. How do we blend it in cities where this peace security question is central? That's it from me. Thank you. Sorry for
Thank you so much, Matti. I think in just keeping it with the flow, we'll turn over to Laura, who will give us an update on the climate study.
Thank you, Sylvia. It's wonderful to be here. My name is Laura Peters. I'm at Oregon State University. I wanted to start off by thanking you, Matti, for your presentation. We're going to pick up on the same line of thinking, actually. So the research on urban environmental peace building is compelled by the same reality that Sylvia presented. We're seeing increasing rates of urbanization and just the realities that the majority of the world is living in urban environments. And we're also compelled by the same questions around where are the risks, the very particular risks that are tailored to those environments. And related, but separately, where do we see the opportunities? How can we identify opportunities, create opportunities, and leverage opportunities for environmental governance and sustainability, as well as the peace building, and ideally together. So we learned from across fields that the urban is quite unique, and I won't repeat from what you've already shared. We're in agreement that we see the risks and opportunities. We see situations of increasing fragmentation, but also integration. These types of contexts compel us to look beyond the state as the main actor in many cases, and to really consider dynamic situations. So what we were wondering with our research on urban environmental peace building is, to what extent does our community of scholarship actually engage deeply and really consider urban contexts? So I'm presenting today on behalf of a project led by Sylvia and in collaboration with Erin Clark Ginsberg, who is an independent consultant. And so this is what we did. We sought to just take a stab at understanding how does our field actually understand this, because we have a unique lens outside of other fields like urban peace building, urban disaster risk reduction, urban sustainability, these types of fields. We think a little bit differently. And so we wanted to understand how does our literature engage with the urban. And we are particularly curious, we did a lot of deep thinking around, well, what is the urban? So the urban goes beyond particular contexts. So we think about, places that might have names or not. And, kind of broadly thinking about cities, but also thinking about cities and the urban as actually systems. We think about how the built and natural environment to come together with human systems. We think about the urban as a set of processes, including urbanization and planetary urbanization, where virtually all contexts around the world are touched to some degree by urbanization. So we took stock of the literature, did a systematic review of approximately 150 environmental peace building articles. Not necessarily, we didn't look at gray literature or books, but we looked at the full set of scholarly literature in the past few months to understand to what extent are we actually thinking about the urban. Spoiler alert, we found not very much. So we did a deep read of all approximately 150 articles, just to see, are there any places that are named? Are there any, are we talking about cities? Are there mention of towns? Are there mention of, particular dynamics that really anything that we could possibly find? And we coded this. So we coded it according to, the top score would basically mean that this is like a central focus of an article, whether that's conceptual or empirical. And then a lesser degree, is there a section that particularly deals with and talks about the urban or a city or, anything that's related, all the way down to, is there a paragraph? Is there a sentence? Is there any place that is named that is a city? And I'll ask the audience, how many do you think that how many articles do you think that are out there that actually center in environmental people?
0.
What is that again? 0. Okay, perfect answer.
Laura, can I just ask, what keyword search did you use?
Our keyword search for the articles, environmental peace building, environmental peacemaking. I think we did environmental peace with an asterisk. It's really trying to take stock of the full, anything that is self-identifying as environmental peace building literature.
I don't want to start a conversation, but I want to come back.
Yes. So anyway, so there were 2 articles we were able to identify that have a section that's related to the urban. There were 10 that had a paragraph, and then a few more that had some kind of mention, and then the vast majority, there's no real mention. And again, we see this across the conceptual literature as well as the empirical. And what this means is that even with the conceptual literature, we're sort of conflating a lot of very different types of contexts and assuming that the same treatment may be appropriate for all of those, which we may imagine possibly be problematic. So this is where our literature review ended and where our imagination began. So what we're trying to do is to, really think across policy, practice, and research to think about, okay, well, what would a robust urban environmental peace building agenda look like? Where should we be headed? What should we be encouraging? Where should we be looking? And ideally, we want to be thinking about concepts and approaches as well as particular contexts that these are derived from, and to develop an understanding that cuts across the theoretical, drawing from multiple literatures, to your point, Larry, perhaps what I imagine might be which we do in the article, draw from, how are other similar fields thinking about the urban. And so we put together a definition, a working definition, that I'll read this one out. Urban environmental peace building is an approach that explicitly engages power and politics in urban contexts, processes, and systems to build sustainable peace through and for nature. And so what we're starting to understand and putting out there in a paper that will be forthcoming is to approach this through through about 3 strategies, through interdisciplinarity, including drawing across different fields, building out that empirical base through partnerships, and related to this last point, really thinking about partnerships between research and practice, and not to leave you out on the policy side, but very interested in building these symbiotic relationships to know that, are we asking the right questions, and are we looking in the right places to answer those questions? And so I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Laura. Well, keep going. Hector, I'll turn it over to you for some reflection and insight from the policy side.
Yeah, I think it's a bit more, research and observations, like in-depth research, to be honest. But thank you. I want to just start with a question. Who here lives in a city?
New York is a city.
One. Okay. So of course, like the great majority here in the room lives in the city, and that also reflects on what the participants already said. Like most of the population lives in cities. Sometimes the rural is very idealistic, but a lot of well-being and development happens at least close to infrastructure and services that cities provide. So I would say that when we speak about environmental peace building, we always picture the countryside, rivers, borderlands, and the urban story out of the picture. But one of the points that I want to argue is that this image is incomplete, and that especially in the American continent, most of violence and human insecurity happens in cities. So the states in Latin America is the region with most violent homicides, but there are only 2 latent conflicts. Actual civil wars are like in Haiti and Colombia, but still the region is the region with the most homicides in the world. So, and those happens in cities with criminality. So that's why one of the motivations why I started engaging in speaking with Matthew about this topic. So, first I want to speak about the sort of rural bias that exists in environmental peace building as an emerging field. Or it's not as emerging. We have already a glossary, so it's more consolidated. But why the urban part is missing? How this can look like, but building some evidence from Latin American cities especially. And then I try to build a typology of entry points and key lessons. We're still working on this and in very engaged discussions with Martin and Sylvia. So the rural bias, why cities have been left out and why it matters. So looking at there is a blind spot. So the most canonical studies that emerging in environmental peace building were focusing on shared rivers, forests, borderlands, especially in rural areas in post-conflict agrarian settings, under this theory that the environment is more like a neutral space or can provide sort of a neutral space and an entry point for starting dialogue and cooperation. But the nature-based peace building in urban context is not some theorized, and it's really a great start to have this definition around power. But for example, there is no comparison across cities on urban environmental peace building. There's a lot of gang conflict and post-conflict reintegration that happens in cities. And usually this is treated as a security or development problem, but not as an environmental problem, or is not related to the environmental layer. So there is a gap on a systematic typology or this cross comparative studies. So I'm going to just go through this because, as we already said, that is over 55% of the world population lives in cities, but in Latin America, the figure exists to 80%. where I'm from in Colombia, even though 60% of the country belongs to the Amazon, almost 80% of the population lives in cities and small cities. So the conflict is not that much on rural insurgencies, but it moves to criminal networks that are embedded in cities, but that also had connections and ties with environmental crimes happening in the Amazon. That's one of the cases in Brazil where some of the gangs from Rio and from Sao Paulo have connections with environmental crime in the Amazon cities. Yeah, so the logic of environmental peacebuilding is also a bit different in urban settings because the actors are different. And talking, for example, about gangs and also the spatial distribution in urban settings where the most marginalized communities are also the ones most exposed to violence, and also where the displaced populations arrive, where there's already attention for jobs and for access to service and infrastructures happen also in cities. So the cooperation also emerged through different mechanisms. So, for example, not towards the governance on a river or on a borderland, but more, for example, towards stewardship of green spaces. So some examples from Latin American cities that I collected, mostly of Colombia, of course, because I know the context there. But for example, in cities like there is a satellite city close to Bogota that is called Soacha, which is almost integrated to Bogota. There is a hotspot for receiving not only displaced populations, but also former combatants from different peace processes, so paramilitaries or guerrillas that live together there. And more, the reintegration process is using environmental strategies to show how they can reintegrate and show like this goodwill to restore, for example, spaces, tree planting, gardens. Some of these are led by women, and this also creates a very symbolic space of not only the integration, but also reconciliation with the victims themselves. So it's difficult, it's critical because there has been cases where, for example, a whole town was displaced by paramilitaries and they went to live in the same neighborhood. Like almost the whole town is like 3 or 4 houses were living, converted their town into a neighborhood in the city. But they were aware that some paramilitaries were also, or former paramilitaries were also there. So they were in a process of trying to reconcile somehow without even any public policy at the moment. With the peace building process, now there are more strategies actively trying to engage this, and these community gardens and green spaces are a good way to do so. Also in Cali, one of the examples that Mati presented is how wetland restoration in a marginalized area that is very has a stereotype for violence, for gangs, made through a foundation that was led by youth. They gathered some budget from projects from international cooperation and developed a technology for restoration with biochemical processes in a wetland. And they integrated the youth in the community, and they became from being gangsters to somehow stewards of and protecting this wetland, and also they got some jobs in management in the lagoon. So it became like a space for people to be on the neighborhood without this latent violence. And also in the last COP in Belém, there was a network of people from the favelas that wanted to show what they were doing on some restoration projects and how, like, put a face on it, like from the favelas we are here, and it's not only like on the big national micro policies, but also like the work that they were doing there, where also they try to engage youth to avoid them to being part of gangs. Yeah. So so one key dynamic is that the environmental work provides this sort of neutral terrain for reducing the stigma for ex-combatants and also gang members, even in El Salvador, where there's this critical hard security policy. They also have programs where they take the convicts and also integrate it in doing some cleaning of some areas, like the ones that are not categorized as the most dangerous ones. So it's interesting to see how this can also promote reintegration into societies. And this is sort of typology that I was trying to draft out of this, and has 4 different dimensions, but they are sort of overlapping. So, for example, the first one is this already what I mentioned, the reintegration through ecological labor. And it's this symbolic that this physical labor also contributes to restoring the ecosystem, but also the relationships with victims. Then the 2 and the 4 are related somehow, and is that this green space acting as a neutral commons helps to build social cohesion among different groups, and also as a tool for environmental justice. So the case of the favelas, where they were like marginalized communities claiming for environmental justice and action, because sometimes there is these invisible barriers in the cities that are highly marginalized. This also happens in Southern Africa with colonial legacies, etc. So this act of claiming their rights and as environmental actors put them on a way to, so their voices are more heard, and they have a way of participating in the public space. And then this enabling of green spaces also helps the most marginalized and the youth to become stewards and to integrate with other parts of society that see them as dangerous. So, for example, in Colombia, there is a case in a corridor in the mountains that border Bogota. There was a path being built to do hiking in the mountains, but there were robberies at some times, and there was an association of neighbors. So it's a corridor that is like in between the rich neighborhood and a favela, so to say. And this association wanted to protect the path from a development of more high luxury buildings. And what this did was that it put together the people from the barrio, from the favela, with the high-class neighborhood, and they integrated the youth as eco guides in this corridor. And somehow it was like create a safe space, and this is still evolving. So it was a nice way that where this common fight for protecting the environmental corridor created also like social cohesion among different groups. And then there is the 3rd one, that is climate adaptation and urban infrastructure as a way also to protect the vulnerable communities, but also to adapt through greener infrastructure for climate adaptation. And this is also, it can also have problems if it is not done in a sensitive manner because of the green gentrification that Mati mentioned. So what did we learn? That there are some slightly different mechanisms from urban environmental peace building to the most mainstream environmental peace building, so to say. Addressing climate vulnerability is a powerful entry point. Gender and youth dimensions are critical in this, but there are open questions. So under what condition does this green space cooperation reduce violence when it's only cosmetic? That, okay, let's build just a new park and then we just push out some people to make it pretty and not integrate the people. And then how do we measure these peace building outcomes in urban settings, which is also a common question in environmental peace building, but the monitoring and evaluation is still missing. Yeah, and okay, final message, yeah, cities are not an exception, is the new frontier, and it needs more practitioners, researchers to advance on this field.
Thank you, Hector, for the perspective from Latin America. I'll now turn it to Martha for another view from Fractal.
Yes.
And then afterward, we will open it up for a conversation. So if you have questions, think about them already now, while you, of course, also listen very closely to Mark. It's yours.
Thank you so much. And I won't take long because I know that the audience needs more time to ask questions with brilliant presentations. And thank you to the previous presenters. I work with an organization called the Life and Peace Institute. I'm based in Nairobi, Kenya, and we focus on peace building issues in the Horn of Africa. We also have an office in the Great Lakes as well. And I think when I was approached to see if I'd be interested in sitting on this panel, I had said it would be a good opportunity to speak on some of the work that we have done in the Horn of Africa, looking specifically at two specific countries, two specific cities. So Kisumu in Kenya, anybody heard of it? Yeah. And Baidoa in Somalia, anybody heard of it? Yeah. So we're in good space here. So I thought that it would be an opportunity, I think, reviewing the papers to be able to take you through potentially just real quick the work that we did in these two cities, focusing on urban migration and what that speaks to in terms of some of the similarities, or where I found maybe some of the potential gaps maybe that exist in what has been presented earlier. But I think looking at both the papers that were shared earlier with us, I think that the urban dimension of climate security definitely remains under-researched. And I think that in the research work that we did in Kisumu and Baidoa confirmed this gap by exploring where climate, conflict and governance challenges also intersect. I think that came out very clear for me. I think the two studies also helped us to look at and identify the aspect of rural to urban migration as a key pathway linking climate change and insecurity. And that's what the piece of research that we also, the findings from our research also pulled out in Kisumu and Baidoa as well, where we found that climate mobility is definitely reshaping urban demographics, service demands and livelihood systems as well. I think what we found primarily is that when cities are unable to absorb the new arrivals inclusively, vulnerabilities and tensions can definitely deepen, and we cite many examples for that in both Kisumu and Baidoa. We have many climate-affected households where the settlement is usually in informal areas, where you find that there's a high level of flooding, such as the case in Kisumu, lots of environmental degradation and limited services. And I think that has also been highlighted in the presentations that we've heard earlier, as well as pressure on social and economic exclusion. I think the papers also made a compelling case that climate adaptation and environmental management can serve as entry points definitely for peace building. And our findings are similar in the research that we've done, highlighting how community-led approaches specifically to managing shared environmental challenges can work towards building trust, building cooperation across diverse urban populations as well. And I think this speaks directly to the aspect of ownership. Ownership of one's environment as a key peace building requirement as well. I think a key takeaway for us from both studies and our research as well is that climate adaptation, urban planning, migration governance, and peace building cannot be treated separately. And building resilient cities requires bringing these agendas together around certain realities of rapidly urbanizing communities as well. I think maybe some gaps in the papers that we picked up and some considerations as well, maybe going forward as you're finalizing the research, is that the papers identified urbanization and migration as major trends, but provided maybe limited insight into what happens after people actually arrive in these cities and some of the challenges that come about. So allow me to share, especially from a regional perspective, where this, in terms of where the displaced populations actually do settle. Like I mentioned earlier, in Kisumu and Baidoa, what we found is they actually settle in informal areas, which are flood-prone zones, Baidoa, you have a lot of IDP camps as well. And the distinction between the Kisumu part and Baidoa part is that in Baidoa, you're looking at the clan system as well. Then also asking the question how informal areas where they do settle absorb these climate migrants. And that speaks volumes in terms of aspects that we are seeing, not necessarily just in the Horn, but the spillover effects as well in different parts of the continent, and how environmental risks and social vulnerabilities accumulate in these neighborhoods. Those two go hand in hand. And when I mentioned that I speak to political dynamics, when you look at the situation in Kenya, especially Kisumu being a border area, what does that speak to when you have migration patterns coming from different countries, the spillover effects when it means coming from different countries, and what that speaks to in terms of tolerance or intolerance in terms of the integration of primarily young people who are crossing over. Persons with disabilities also should be included in some of these conversations as well, and other marginalized groups. Economic considerations, I think what we found also in Kisumu is that the pressures when it comes to survival mode and environmental pressures as well and climate pressures as well, there's something that was referred to as sex for fish for survival and livelihood as well. So certain economic considerations that also come with this. The mental health considerations as well, which lead greatly to GBV and SGBV issues as well. Then the aspect of xenophobia as well, as populations are threatened or communities are threatened or feel threatened with migrants coming in. And I think those are some of the things that we tend not to consider in some of these spaces. But I think that stands out prominently, especially from a regional perspectives when we're talking about crossing borders or crossing boundaries because of these climate or environmental considerations. I think that both studies call for greater attention to urban spaces, yet much of the literature still remains conceptual. I think Kisumu and Baidoa, once again, offer the research in Kisumu and Baidoa also offer concrete examples of how climate mobility is already reshaping cities in the Horn of Africa as a whole. And our findings also demonstrate that the urban climate security nexus is already unfolding at a fast pace in the rapidly growing secondary cities. So Kisumu and Baidoa are referred to in our research as secondary cities. And then the many climate security debates as well continue to draw heavily on global or generalized examples. But LPI, I think, has narrowed this down to be very specific in terms of the examples that we've been able to pull out and share in both Kisumu and Baidoa as well. Providing evidence of a rapidly urbanized intermediary city such as Kisumu and a fragile displacement affected city such as Baidoa. I think together there's demonstration that urban climate peace dynamics manifest differently depending on context, governance capacity, and patterns of mobility. So nothing is homogeneous. Some of the policy insights, coming from our research, focus on investing in rural livelihoods to reduce climate-driven migration by strengthening climate-resilient agriculture and addressing cross-border vulnerabilities as well, like I mentioned in the situation in the context of Kisumu. Implementing catchment-based climate adaptation, strengthening urban land use planning, facilitating, managing, and regularizing urban migration, integrating climate-induced displacement, aligning humanitarian action with long-term urban development, and this speaks directly to the situation Baidoa, mobilizing and coordinating climate financing as well. Also taking into consideration the global realities as well. Regional implications, I think we're looking at the secondary cities as becoming displacement hubs, definitely in the Horn of Africa, with migration dynamics expected to intensify. Unregulated migration will definitely strain housing, services, infrastructure, increasing the risk of social tension and insecurity, and also the involvement in the political conversations also in some of these countries. And integrated multi-level and gender responsive policy interventions are definitely urgently needed. And I think just to quickly conclude, I think what I find valuable in these studies is their call to take cities seriously as sites of environmental peace building. And I think once again, highlighting our research in Kisumu and Baidoa, this is definitely reinforced. showing how climate-related mobility is already transforming urban spaces, creating new governance challenges as well, but also opportunities for resilience as well as social cohesion as well. And I think the question that remains is whether urban institutions are prepared to respond effectively in ways that actually do strengthen peace and deepen vulnerability. Thank you. I submit.
Thank you so much, Martha. Thank you for giving us a very hands-on perspective from Beto and Peacebuilding. While also highlighting the transboundary dimension to this, right? So it's as much as we say we go local because we want to move away from the nation state perspective, it remains somewhat international and